I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would sabotage her own happiness for someone who barely knew she existed. But here I am, Aurora Walters, 34 years old, eating frozen dinners in a studio apartment, and wondering how I managed to destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. A year ago, I had it all figured out. Loving husband, comfortable life, successful career. Now I spend my evenings wondering if Landon ever thinks about me, or if Kieran even remembers my name. The answer to both, I suspect, is probably not. Everyone wants to know what really happened. Friends, family, even my new therapist. They all seem convinced there must be some deeper explanation. An unhappy marriage, incompatible values, something that would justify blowing up 8 years together. But the truth is much simpler and infinitely more embarrassing. I convinced myself I was in love with someone who never saw me as anything more than a friendly colleague. Let me start with Landon, because that's where the story really begins. We met in college. He was studying business. I was getting my degree in communications. Nothing dramatic about how we got together, no lightning bolts or movie moments. We were friends first, study partners who gradually realized we enjoyed each other's company more than anyone else's. Landon had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. Not through grand gestures or expensive surprises, but through attention. He remembered that I liked extra foam in my coffee, and that I got cranky when I was hungry. He'd bring me snacks during late study sessions and text me funny observations throughout the day. When I was stressed about job interviews after graduation, he'd run me a bath and sit with me while I vented about impossible requirements and salary negotiations. We got married 2 years after college, and it was everything a wedding should be. Surrounded by people who genuinely loved us, dancing to songs that meant something, making promises we both intended to keep. Our life together developed into something comfortable and predictable in the best possible way. Landon worked for a small consulting firm. I landed a position at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized marketing agency downtown. We bought a townhouse with a tiny yard where we hosted barbecues and planted vegetables we never quite managed to harvest in time. It wasn't passionate in the way movies portray love, but it was steady and real. Landon still left me little notes, still remembered to buy the expensive coffee I liked, still listened when I complained about difficult clients or office politics. We had our rhythms, Friday night pizza and whatever show we were binge watching, Saturday morning farmers market visits, Sunday afternoon naps that sometimes turned into something more intimate. Looking back, I think I mistook contentment for settling. I started believing that if I wasn't constantly exhilarated by my relationship, something must be missing. I'd watch romantic comedies and wonder why Landon never swept me off my feet with spontaneous declarations of love. I'd see couples having dramatic fights and makeups and wonder if our peaceful disagreements meant we lacked passion. I was so busy looking for something that felt like the movies that I stopped appreciating what I actually had. Kieran Hoffman joined our agency on a rainy Monday in October. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when he walked in with Rachel from HR, who was giving him the standard new employee tour. The first thing I noticed was his laugh, rich and genuine in response to something she'd said. The second thing I noticed was how he looked in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful young professionals. "Aurora, meet Kieran," Rachel said, gesturing between us. "He'll be working on the Sterling account with your team." When he shook my hand, he held eye contact just a beat longer than necessary. "Aurora," he repeated, like he was testing how my name felt in his mouth. Beautiful name for someone who clearly brightens up the office. It was a cheesy line, the kind I would normally roll my eyes at, but something about his delivery made it feel sincere rather than sleazy. I felt heat creep up my neck and hoped it wasn't visible. "Welcome to the madhouse," I managed, trying to sound casual and professional. "Fair warning, the Sterling account is demanding, but the coffee here makes up for it." "Good to know I'll have an excellent guide," he said, flashing a smile that made my stomach flutter in a way I hadn't experienced in years. That evening, I found myself telling Landon about our new teammate. "Seems competent," I said casually. not mentioning the flutter or the way Kieran had complimented my presentation during our team meeting. Rachel thinks he'll fit in well, Landon nodded absently, focused on the news. That's good, honey. You've been saying you needed more help with that account. His lack of curiosity should have been reassuring, but instead it felt like confirmation that our relationship had become too comfortable, too predictable. Landon trusted me completely, and for the first time in our marriage, that trust felt stifling rather than secure. Over the next few weeks, Kieran and I developed an easy working relationship. He was smart and creative, with ideas that elevated our campaigns beyond the safe, conventional approaches we'd been defaulting to. More than that, he seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. During brainstorming sessions, he'd build on my suggestions in ways that made me feel brilliant. That's exactly what I was thinking, he'd say, even when I knew my idea had been half-formed at best. You have such a sophisticated understanding of consumer psychology. Working with Kieran was energizing in a way I'd forgotten work could be. I started looking forward to Mondays for the first time in years, anticipating our strategy meetings and collaborative sessions. When he suggested we grab lunch to discuss the Sterling campaign, I agreed immediately. This is nice, he said, as we settled into a booth at the cafe across from our office. I've been so focused on getting up to speed. I haven't had a chance to really get to know my colleagues. What do you want to know? I asked, suddenly self-conscious about how that might sound. Everything, he said simply. You've been here, 4 years? You must have some good stories about office politics and client disasters. I found myself telling him about Morrison's quirks and personalities, sharing inside jokes and observations I usually save for Landon. Kieran laughed at all the right moments and asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually listening. When I mentioned my frustration with how our creative director always shot down innovative ideas, Kieran leaned forward. That's why I was so impressed with your Sterling presentation, he said. You managed to be creative and strategic without giving him ammunition to shut you down. That takes real skill. I felt myself flush with pride. At home, when I talked about work challenges, Landon would offer generic encouragement. You're great at your job, honey, or don't let him get to you. Kieran's specific, thoughtful feedback felt like validation I hadn't realized I was craving. These lunches became a regular thing. Nothing inappropriate, just two colleagues discussing work over sandwiches and coffee. But I started looking forward to them more than I looked forward to my evenings at home. The shift from professional to personal happened gradually, so subtly that I could tell myself we were still just friends. Kieran began texting me articles he thought I'd find interesting, usually related to marketing trends or industry gossip. I'd respond with my thoughts, and our conversations would drift into other topics. Weekend plans, random observations about our coworkers. When Landon asked who I was texting one evening, I said it was my friend Julie from college. The lie came so easily, I barely registered it as one. How's she doing? Landon asked, looking up from his laptop. Good, I said vaguely, already turning back to my phone where Kieran had sent a funny observation about our boss's latest motivational email. Just catching up. I started staying late at the office when Kieran was working late, telling myself it was dedication to the Sterling project. We'd order Chinese food and spread our materials across the conference room table, working in comfortable proximity. Sometimes our hands would brush reaching for the same document, and I'd feel that flutter again, more intense each time. Your husband's lucky, Kieran said one evening, apropos of nothing. We'd been discussing weekend plans, and I'd mentioned Landon's softball league. What do you mean? I asked, though my heart was racing. Just that you're incredible, he said, not meeting my eyes. Smart, beautiful, creative. He must be constantly amazed that he gets to come home to you every night. I should have redirected the conversation back to work. Instead, I heard myself saying, I don't think he notices anymore. Kieran looked up then, his expression serious. Then he's an idiot. That comment stayed with me for days. I found myself studying Landon with new eyes, looking for evidence that he was taking me for granted. When he absently kissed my forehead while reaching for his coffee mug, I wondered if he was even conscious of the gesture. When he complimented dinner, I analyzed his tone for signs of genuine appreciation versus polite routine. I was building a case against my own marriage, collecting evidence that would justify whatever was happening between Kieran and me. The company's annual holiday party was held at an upscale hotel downtown, the kind of event where everyone dressed up and pretended the office hierarchy didn't exist for one night. I'd bought a new dress, emerald green, more fitted than anything I'd worn in years. When I showed it to Landon, he said I looked beautiful, but his tone was distracted, casual. "You always look beautiful," he added, clearly trying to be more enthusiastic. But the effort was obvious. At the party, Kieran appeared at my elbow within minutes of my arrival. "Wow," he said, his eyes traveling from my face to my dress and back again. "You look absolutely stunning." The way he said it, with complete attention, made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the room. When he offered to get me a drink, I followed him to the bar, acutely aware of his hand on the small of my back, as he guided me through the crowd. We found ourselves on the hotel's outdoor terrace, talking and laughing while the party continued inside. The city sparkled below us, and I felt sophisticated and desired in a way I hadn't in years. When Kieran moved closer to share his jacket because I was cold, I didn't step away. "I have to ask you something," he said, his voice lower than usual. "What?" I whispered, certain he was about to confess feelings I'd been imagining for months. "Are you happy? In your marriage, I mean?" The question caught me off guard. "That's complicated," I said, which wasn't an answer but felt like the beginning of one. "It shouldn't be," Kieran said. "Being happy with someone should be the simplest thing in the world." I was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lights. "Sometimes I think I settled," I admitted. Like I was so focused on finding someone stable and reliable that I forgot to look for someone who would challenge me, excite me. "And now?" Kieran asked. I turned to look at him, this beautiful man who made me feel interesting and desirable and alive. Now I think I understand what I've been missing. We were standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. For a moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. Instead, he stepped back. "Aurora," he said carefully, "I need you to know that I would never want to complicate your life." "What if I want it to be complicated?" I asked, feeling bold and reckless. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Landon. "Hope you're having fun. Love you." The simple message felt like a splash of cold water. Here was my husband, trusting me completely, sending loving messages while I was on a terrace with another man, discussing the inadequacies of our marriage. "I should go back inside," I said, though I made no move to leave. "Aurora," Kieran said, and something in his tone made me look at him. "You deserve to be with someone who appreciates everything about you." I knew he wasn't talking about Landon. The following Monday, everything felt different. Kieran was more attentive than ever, finding excuses to stop by my desk, suggesting we work through lunch on the sterling presentation. When he complimented my ideas in front of the team, I felt that familiar rush of validation. But I also felt guilty every time Landon called or texted, every time he asked about my day with genuine interest. I was living a double life, and the weight of it was becoming unbearable. The breaking point came at our monthly team meeting. Morrison had gathered everyone in the main conference room to discuss year-end goals and celebrate recent successes. The mood was light, celebratory, fueled by the catered lunch and the knowledge that we'd exceeded our quarterly targets. During a discussion about work-life balance, our creative director made some joke about how advertising people had to choose between career success and personal happiness. "Good thing we're all workaholics," he said, raising his coffee cup and a mock toast. "Speak for yourself," said Janet from accounts. "I'd choose my husband over this job any day." "Really?" asked Morrison, grinning. "Even if choosing your husband meant giving up your corner office?" The conversation devolved into playful hypotheticals about what we'd sacrifice for love versus career success. People were laughing, making increasingly ridiculous declarations about what they'd give up for various rewards. That's when Morrison turned to me. "Aurora, you're always so dedicated. What about you? If you had to choose between your career and your marriage, which would win? I should have deflected with a joke. I should have said both were important. Instead, I looked directly at Kieran, who was sitting across the table from me, and said, if I had to choose between my husband and my career would win every time. The room went quiet for a beat, then exploded in laughter and mock protests. Ouch! Landon's in trouble, someone called out. Aurora's married to the job. But I wasn't thinking about the job when I said it. I was thinking about Kieran, about the way he made me feel valued and interesting and alive. Everyone else heard a dedication to career success. Kieran heard what I intended, a declaration that I would choose him over Landon. The meeting moved on, but Kieran caught my eye across the table and smiled in a way that made my heart race. Finally, I thought, he understood how I felt. After the meeting, Kieran appeared at my desk. Can we talk? He asked quietly. We walked to the empty break room, where he turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What you said in there, he began, then paused. I need to make sure I understood correctly. I think you did, I said, feeling brave and terrified at the same time. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Aurora, I'm flattered, really. You're an amazing woman, and any man would be lucky to have your attention. My stomach started to sink at the word but I could hear coming. But I don't get involved with married women. It's a rule I made for myself a long time ago, and I stick to it. I felt like I'd been slapped. So all this time, the lunches, the conversations, the friendship, Kieran said firmly. I value our working relationship and our friendship, but I never intended to give you the impression it could be anything more. But the things you said, I protested, hearing the desperation in my own voice, about my husband not appreciating me, about deserving someone who... I was being supportive, Kieran said, looking uncomfortable, as a friend. If I made you think I meant something else, I apologize. I stared at him, this man I'd been fantasizing about for months, and realized he'd never seen me the way I'd seen him. Every meaningful glance I'd imagined, every moment of connection I'd treasured, it had all been in my head. I think I should get back to work, I said, my face burning with embarrassment. Aurora, I hope this doesn't make things awkward between us, Kieran said. You're a valuable part of this team, and I'd hate for... It's fine, I interrupted. Though nothing was fine. I just humiliated myself in front of someone who'd never wanted me at all. The next few days were torture. I had to sit in meetings with Kieran, pretend to collaborate professionally while dying inside from embarrassment. He was kind but distant, clearly trying to reestablish appropriate boundaries. Meanwhile, word of my declaration at the team meeting had spread through the office. People kept making jokes about my dedication to the job, my poor husband who came second to quarterly reports. Each comment was a reminder of what I'd really meant and how foolish I'd been. When Janet from accounts pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home, I realized the gossip had taken on a life of its own. People are talking, she said gently, about what you said in the meeting and about you and Kieran spending so much time together. I just wanted to make sure you knew. My blood went cold. What are they saying? Nothing malicious, Janet assured me quickly. Just wondering if there's something going on between you two. You know how office gossip works. I did know, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers reached Morrison, or worse, before someone mentioned it to their spouse who might know Landon. That night, I went home to our townhouse, where Landon was making dinner and humming along to the music on his phone. He looked up when I walked in, smiling the same warm, uncomplicated smile he'd been giving me for 8 years. How was your day, he asked. The same question he asked every evening because he cared about my answer. Fine, I said, the same lie I'd been telling for months. But as I watched him move around our kitchen, in the home we'd chosen together, surrounded by the life we'd built, I realized what I'd been risking. Not just for Kieran, who'd never wanted me anyway, but for some fantasy version of excitement and passion that existed only in my imagination. 2 weeks later, everything came crashing down. I was at lunch with my friend Sophie, catching up after months of being too distracted by my Kieran obsession to maintain our friendship properly. You seem different, Sophie said, studying my face across the table. Distant. Is everything okay with you and Landon? I'd been holding the secret for so long that when she asked directly, it all came pouring out. The attraction to Kieran, the emotional affair, the public declaration I'd made thinking he felt the same way, his gentle rejection. Sophie listened without judgment until I finished, then shook her head slowly. "Oh, Aurora," she said softly. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, tears starting to fall. I thought I was falling in love, but he doesn't even see me that way. I've been living in this fantasy, and now I don't know how to get back to reality. "You need to tell Landon," Sophie said. "He deserves to know what's been going on." The thought of confessing to Landon terrified me, not because I thought he'd leave, though he might, but because I'd have to admit that I'd been willing to throw away our marriage for someone who'd never wanted me in the first place. "What if he can't forgive me?" I asked. "What if he can?" Sophie countered. "But Aurora, you can't keep living this lie. It's not fair to him, and it's destroying you." I knew she was right, but knowing and doing are different things. I went home that night planning to confess, but when I saw Landon reading on the couch, looking so peaceful and trusting, I lost my nerve. Instead, I threw myself into being the perfect wife. I cooked elaborate dinners, suggested weekend getaways, tried to recapture the easy intimacy we'd once shared. But the guilt was eating me alive, and Landon could sense something was wrong. "You've been weird lately," he said one evening after I'd deflected yet another attempt at genuine conversation. "Overly attentive, but also distant. What's going on?" "Nothing," I said automatically. "Just work stress." Landon studied my face. "Is there something you need to tell me?" was the perfect opening, the moment I should have been honest. Instead, I kissed him and suggested we watch a movie. Another deflection in a long series of deflections. The universe has a way of forcing our hand when we're too cowardly to act ourselves. 3 days after Landon asked if I had something to tell him, he came home from work early and found me crying at our kitchen table. I'd just gotten off the phone with Morrison, who'd called to let me know that Kieran was transferring to our Los Angeles office. Family reasons, Morrison had said, but I suspected Kieran had requested the transfer to get away from the awkward situation I'd created. When Landon walked in and saw me sobbing, his immediate assumption was that someone had died. "What happened?" he asked, rushing to my side. "Is it your mom, Sophie?" I looked up at this good man, this husband who still thought the best of me even when I was falling apart, and I couldn't lie anymore. "It's me," I said. "I've ruined everything." The whole story came out then, messily and through tears. The attraction to Kieran, the emotional affair, the fantasy relationship I'd built in my head, the public declaration that everyone in my office had heard, the humiliating rejection, the months of lies and deception. Landon listened in silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "How long?" he asked quietly. 6 months, I whispered. "Since October." "And you told your entire office you'd choose someone else over me?" I nodded, fresh tears starting. "But he didn't even want me, Landon. It was all in my head. I threw away everything for someone who saw me as just a colleague." "That doesn't make it better, Aurora," Landon said, his voice hollow. "That makes it worse. You were willing to leave me for someone who didn't even care about you." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I'm sorry," I said desperately. "I'm so sorry. I was confused and stupid and—" "You were having an emotional affair," Landon said flatly, "for 6 months. While I was here, trusting you, loving you, planning our future." The pain in his voice was unbearable. "I never stopped loving you," I said. "But you stopped choosing me," Landon replied. "Every day for 6 months, you chose him. And when you had the chance to publicly affirm our marriage, you chose him again. We tried counseling, but the trust was broken in a way that couldn't be repaired. Landon would listen to me apologize and explain, but I could see in his eyes that he was already gone. The man who used to leave me love notes and remember my coffee preferences now looked at me with polite distance. "I keep thinking about all the times you came home late," he said during one particularly painful session. "All the times you were on your phone, distracted. I thought you were just stressed about work, but you were thinking about him." "It wasn't real," I insisted. "The whole thing was a fantasy." "But it was real to you," Landon said. "Real enough that you chose it over us." The counselor asked what we both wanted from the relationship going forward. Landon was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I want to save this marriage," he said finally. "But I don't think I do anymore. I look at Aurora, and I see someone who is willing to throw away 8 years for a crush on someone who barely knew she existed. I don't know how to come back from that." We divorced quietly and civilly. Landon was generous in the settlement, more generous than I deserved. He took our house, which was fair since I could no longer bear to live there anyway. Too many memories of the life I'd sabotaged. I found a small apartment across town and tried to rebuild. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness or the financial stress. It was the knowledge that I'd done this to myself. There was no villain in this story except my own selfishness and stupidity. Kieran left for Los Angeles without saying goodbye. I heard through office gossip that he was engaged to someone there within 6 months. I wondered if she was the real reason for his transfer, if there had been someone else all along. It shouldn't have mattered. He'd made it clear he was never interested in me, but it stung anyway. Work became awkward after the divorce. Everyone knew why my marriage had ended, and the gossip mill was merciless. I started looking for other positions and eventually found one at a smaller agency downtown. Lower pay, longer hours, but at least no one there knew my history. It's been a year since Landon and I separated, 8 months since our divorce was finalized. I've been on exactly 3 dates, all disasters in their own way. One man spent the entire evening talking about his ex-wife. Another seemed lovely until he mentioned being married and looking for something discreet. The third was actually pleasant, but when he asked why my marriage ended, I gave some vague answer about growing apart, and then spent the rest of the evening wondering if I'd ever be able to tell the truth about what I'd done. When I said I'd choose my career over my husband, I was really saying I'd choose fantasy over reality, excitement over security, selfish desire over mature love. And I was wrong, dead wrong. The cruelest irony is that I finally understand what I had with Landon, but only after I threw it away. Real love isn't the butterfly-inducing excitement of a new crush. It's someone who brings you coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, who listens to your work problems without trying to fix them, who trusts you completely even when you don't deserve it. It's someone who sees you at your worst, tired, cranky, unshowered, and still chooses you every day. Someone who remembers that you like the corner pieces of brownies and saves them for you. Someone who will drive across town at midnight to bring you medicine when you're sick. Kieran gave me compliments and made me feel attractive and interesting for a few months. Landon gave me 8 years of partnership, loyalty, and unconditional love. I traded a diamond for a piece of glass because the glass caught the light in a prettier way. I'm not telling this for sympathy or forgiveness. I'm writing it because I hope someone else might read it and recognize themselves before it's too late. If you have someone who loves you reliably, kindly, completely, someone who makes your ordinary life feel extraordinary just by being in it, hold on to them. Don't go chasing fantasies that exist only in your imagination. I said I'd choose my coworker over my husband if I had to. As it turned out, I didn't have to. I chose to. And now I have neither because the coworker was never really an option, and the husband was only available as long as I chose him back. The woman in the grocery store with Landon looked at him the way I used to, the way I should have continued to. She's getting the love I gave up, and she probably has no idea how lucky she is. I hope she never finds out the way I did. Aurora Walters, 34, starting over and finally understanding what she lost. Some lessons come too late to matter, but maybe they can still matter to someone else.